A guardsman from Tampa tells in chilling detail what he discovered in the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. There were drowning chambers, there were blood-stained walls, but this was after the torture scandal hit the world press. So everybody assumed the torture of Iraqis by Americans stopped because of all that, right? Well, not at all. A year or two later, this soldier found it was still going on. Our troops were rounding up children and innocent civilians, and what they did to them there made him mad enough to cry foul all the way to the top. You'll see what he saw, hear what he did about it, and whether he still supports the war in Iraq. Plus your calls, next on Your Turn.
It's important to us.
The photos of Iraqis being tortured by American troops at Abu Ghraib shocked the world. It led to outrage and investigations and punishment, even prison, for what the U.S. military called the actions of a few rogue soldiers. So imagine the shock of an Army sergeant from the Florida Army National Guard who was dispatched to Abu Ghraib a couple of years after the scandal, only to find the torture was still going on. He started detailing what he saw, complete with pictures and emails to his friends and family, and now has put together a chilling book called Torture Central, Emails from Abu Ghraib. Michael Keller, in his first television interview, joins us today. He's a former sergeant with the Florida Army National Guard, now back home with his family in Tampa, an executive at a local software company. And your book is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So you're in your 20s, got a job, got a family, and decide to go sign up to go to Iraq. Why?
Right. Well, it really starts on October 7th, 2001. It was a few weeks after the Al-Qaeda attacks, and my wife and I were sitting in our living room on the couch watching the president announce the invasion of Afghanistan. And I remember watching the president and listening to his speech, and during a part of it, he reads a letter that was sent to him by a fourth grade little girl whose father was in the military. And I remember hearing her story and how it touched me, and really caused me to reevaluate my priorities. I asked myself, why should this girl and her family sacrifice while I just continue on my current career path and make a profit? So what I did is I discussed it with my wife. I went down to a National Guard recruiter, and within a few weeks I was enlisting in the National Guard, and then in November of 2005 I was deployed to Iraq.
So just to sort of set the tone here, you were in support of President Bush and the administration and the invasion of Iraq, and felt like you were all supportive of this.
That's right. Yeah, I'm a lifelong Republican. Voted for President Bush in 2004, and I'm supporting McCain in 2008. And I definitely support the policy that led us into Iraq.
So you get assigned to Abu Ghraib, which we'd all heard about all over the world, and you expected when you got there to find what?
Well, I expected to find media. I expected to find the Red Cross doing regular inspections. I expected to find civilian members of the Department of Defense there, making sure the procedures were proper. And what I found is...
And definitely no torture going on.
Oh, absolutely not. Right.
Didn't expect any torture going on.
The public statements were that we don't do torture, and that the problem had been resolved, and that Abu Ghraib, now everything there was in compliance with the Geneva Conventions. So
cleaned up.
That's what I expected to find.
So what did you find when you got there?
Yeah, well, we arrived in December of 2005, which was, as you said, a year and a half after the abuse photos had been published around the world. And one of the first things that we did when we arrived is we received a briefing from the unit that we were leaving on the standing operating procedure for the facility. The standing operating procedure, or the SOP for short, was designed, developed, and signed off on by the facility commander, who's a lieutenant colonel. And what we were told during that briefing is that according to the SOP, certain torture techniques, some of the same things that soldiers had been court-martialed and imprisoned for over the prior year and a half, that those things were actually a proper procedure for dealing with a detainee in certain situations.
So some of the torture techniques that people had gone to prison for doing not only were still going on, but were sanctioned. They were standard operating procedure to keep doing them.
As ordered by the facility commander, who was a lieutenant colonel. And the procedure that concerned me the most was the use of medical litters, which are called stretchers on the civilian side.
Right.
They were designed with the intent that they be used to escort wounded casualties from the battlefield.
Right.
But in Abu Ghraib, their primary purpose was to inflict pain on detainees for committing disciplinary infractions. And how that would work is a detainee would be laid face down on a litter.
This is a picture right here of how this is done. Okay, yes. So what did they do?
The detainee is laid face down on a medical litter, and then another litter is placed on top of them, producing a sandwich effect. The litters are then tightened together with ratchet straps, creating an improvised vice. And the detainee remains crushed inside of the vice for an hour or longer, with a guard checking every 15 minutes to ensure that they still have a pulse. And it's important to understand that this procedure wasn't done as a part of interrogations or a method of acquiring intelligence. It was being done strictly as punishment for committing disciplinary infractions, such as if a detainee didn't obey an order or if a guard felt he was being disrespected. And while I know that many Americans believe it's appropriate for us to torture terrorists in the effort to gather intelligence, I don't think very many people think it's okay for us to be torturing innocent people simply because they fail to follow an order that's given them in a language that they really can't understand.
So yeah, I think that a lot of people assume that Iraqis are in these detention facilities because they are al-Qaeda sympathizers or terrorists or suicide bombers or people that we need to get information from. And you're saying that this was done not to extract information. This isn't intelligence gathering. This is to punish them for doing something like what? What would be a disciplinary infraction?
If a guard felt he was being disrespected.
Disrespected.
Or if they didn't follow an instruction. But of course, most Iraqis don't speak English, and we didn't have translators present with us, so you'd give an order and they would often not understand what you're even saying, let alone being able to comply.
I know you have a picture in your book of some of the, I don't know if we have this ready, but there were some symbols on the wall that were designed to show the Iraqis, don't do this, don't do that. Right. This is the, yeah, like this. Now, this is what was up there to tell them what the rules were, right?
Right.
So what's happening in these pictures? Like, don't disrespect the American soldier.
Yeah, they're telling you to do what you're told. On the one on the right, they're telling you not to show disrespect towards the MPs.
And how about this one? No spitting? I figured that one out.
No spitting, and I guess that's no having relations with other detainees.
Sexual contact with another detainee. Wow. So you were shocked when you got there and found out this was all still going on?
I was, yeah, and upon discovering it, I began to think what I could do to try to end the practice.
So where was the Red Cross? Nowhere?
Nowhere.
And they're supposed to be coming in and inspecting?
Right. According to the Geneva Conventions, they are the ones that are supposed to provide the oversight to ensure that we're living up to our treaty.
So one of the big complaints after the Abu Ghraib scandal was that the failure was in the system of training these troops to know how to treat detainees. We're going to take a break. Ask Michael Keller when we come back what sort of training he and the rest of his unit got, and talk more with him about what he discovered at Abu Ghraib and what he did about it. We'll be right back. Author of a new, very chilling book called Torture Central, Emails from Abu Ghraib. Michael Keller joins us today from Tampa. The Abu Ghraib scandal, basically what they said happened was, well, these people were put there without any training about the Geneva Convention or what's proper, what's improper, and so that's the problem. We just didn't train them properly enough, and they were just all sort of rogue people acting on their own. So I guess you expected I'm going to be trained in the Geneva Convention, right?
Yeah, I was trained by the Army to be an artilleryman, to shoot rockets and missiles, and I fully expected before being sent to Abu Ghraib to do detainee operations that we would have significant training in the...
This is what you do, this is what you can't
Geneva
do.
Conventions, this is appropriate, this isn't. And instead, what I found is we were sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey for 70 days of Sec 4 training, and that primarily dealt with convoy operations, how to react to IEDs and ambushes and things like that. And there was really no relevant information given on detainee operations. There was actually only 5 days of curriculum set aside for that. And in those 5 days, all they did was things like one entire day was spent spraying us in the eye with pepper spray.
Oh, pleasant.
2 days were spent teaching us how to fill out paperwork, which didn't even exist in Abu Ghraib. Another day was spent teaching us cell extraction techniques, which had no relevancy at Abu Ghraib, where the vast majority of detainees weren't even kept in cells.
So a year later, they still weren't training the detention officers what they could and couldn't do.
I had less training, me and my unit, and the other units that were there with us, we had less training than the unit that was there in 2003, 2004 that had committed the abuse that was publicized.
Less training?
Less training. And the unit that relieved us had the same zero level of training that we did.
Okay, so that's a systemic failure that wasn't corrected.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I think a lot of Americans think is, look, Abu Ghraib sounds like this frightening prison where we put the worst of the worst. These are terrorists, they're al-Qaeda sympathizers, they're insurgents, they're people who hate Americans. Hey, whatever happens in there, because these are the bad guys. Who was being rounded up for this?
The word prison, a common misconception is that we used Abu Ghraib as a prison, but that's not really what it was. There were no convicted criminals at Abu Ghraib. If someone was convicted of a crime, they'd be held at another facility.
So who were these people in Abu Ghraib?
For most, they're people who simply happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A very common reason for somebody to be detained is if the military would receive an anonymous tip that a certain individual was supporting the insurgency. Military would then go to that person's house and arrest everyone of military age living there. And sometimes that could be, a dozen people. And often these tips ended up being nothing more than disgruntled neighbors. Then once someone was detained at Abu Ghraib, even if it was determined that they were really being held for no valid reason, they would often continue to be held for months or even years while the military determined what was best to do with them.
What about the kids kicking the soccer ball?
Yeah, we had a lot of heartbreaking stories. We had two 12-year-old kids whose arrest record simply read, because we were bored. That military arrested them because they were bored.
That's the reason they were arrested.
Yes,
the kids were kicking the soccer ball, and the...
Well, and we had another child, as you mentioned, who was arrested for playing soccer too close to a Marine patrol. So they arrested him. And as I said, once they were in Abu Ghraib, there was no real due process. And in the book, I get into the specifics of how the system worked. But
So are you saying that you feel like many of the people detained in Abu Ghraib were innocent civilians?
I think that's, yeah, absolutely.
The majority of them?
Yeah, and so these are, there's a wide cross spectrum of people. Some of the people were actually supportive of American presence in Iraq. These were some of the same people who were out tearing down the statues of Saddam when American troops first arrived. And then we had PhDs, we had children, we had grandparents, a wide cross spectrum. To me, these are human beings. I spent 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for months with them, learning about their lives, learning about their hopes and their aspirations. And, I try to tell as much of that and much of their story as I can in the book.
Donna in Tampa, your turn.
Thank you. This question is just how in the world does this gentleman now think he's going to help our people in the United States by going public with this book at this time when our soldiers are still over there, our people are here? This is just going to cause an uprising. Is he thinking he can change something over there by publishing this book at this time?
Well, it's a good question, Donna, because before he answers, I do want to tell you that he did complain. Changes were made, and Abu Ghraib is no longer operational. It closed in 2006, right?
Right.
Okay, but go to her issue. What good does it do to raise this now?
Well, first,
does it not hurt the morale of our troops that are still over there?
Well, first, if I can address a larger point, then down, one person I believe can make a difference. Okay, when I got to Abu Ghraib and I discovered these things were happening, I wrote a letter to my my company commander asking for clarification of why we're doing these things when the Geneva Conventions and the official statements are that we shouldn't be.
And we promised the world we wouldn't.
Right, and he responded by simply ignoring the letter. So I then sent a copy of that letter up my chain of command to the facility commander, and her initial response was to threaten me and try to intimidate me. But after that failed, she then went in afterwards into the facility and ordered that the medical letters no longer be used, and SOPs were rewritten to better comply with U.S. and international law.
So your complaint was actually honored in the end?
Yes, to a large extent it was. And as far as why talk about it now, it's because not everything has been corrected and resolved, such as training, such as civilian oversight. And these were the type of systemic problems that caused the abuse in 03 and 04. It's what led to the continued abuse while I was there in 05 and 06. And it's what I'm afraid will cause even more abuse in the future if we don't correct these problems. And these problems are not going to be corrected if we all simply remain silent.
And to those who say, we don't care if they're abused, they are our enemy.
Well, like I said, the people at Abu Ghraib, a lot of them weren't. A lot of them were supportive of American presence there. They were the same people chanting, "Go USA, go George W. Bush," and tearing down statues of Saddam. So they happened to be, in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then had these actions committed to them. So.
Okay, Linda and Frostproof, your turn.
Yes, I would like to just say that I don't approve of the treatment of these individuals. I don't approve of the torture. I don't approve that it's just right just because other nations may treat our people the same way. But what I don't approve of also is someone coming back that worked for the government, took pictures, who may be profiting from the pictures, from the sale of a book, from being a spokesperson on a show. I don't think that makes this right either. To bring it to the right attention, yes. To make the changes, yes. But to profit from this, to me, it doesn't make it any better than the persons who did these things.
Let's take a break. Michael Keller, I'm sure, will be glad to answer your concerns about that. I'm sure he has something to say about it. We'll be right back. Michael Keller, author of Torture Central, just coming out, first television interview, and the people are really responding to what you have to say. The last caller said, look, I don't advocate torture either, but why would you come out with it now? This is wrong. You may be profiting by this. You know, what do you have to say to her?
First, the book is published by a small publisher. I don't anticipate making any money off of it. Certainly, I'm not being paid to be here on your show today.
Right, that's true.
My motivation is to simply create a dialogue, to let people know what's happening, and if they are opposed to torture, and if they're opposed to this sort of detainee treatment, they need to know about it. They need to be informed so that they can know to contact their representatives, to contact the government, to put pressure to stop these type of abuses, and to correct these systemic failures that have led to them in the first place. Like I said, if we all remain silent, then these systemic problems aren't going to solve themselves.
What's the benefit to America?
Of torture?
No, changing the systemic problems of torture of detainees and rounding up the wrong innocent people.
A recently captured leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq said publicly that the 2004 abuse photos were the greatest recruitment tool he had in getting people to join his cause. So adopting a strategy of torture where many of these detainees were released because obviously they were in prison for no reason, so they were held for months or even years, but eventually they're released, they go back to the population, they tell people how they were treated. And instead of America being the example of a just government treating people with decency, we're now allow them to vilify us. So that's the hope in getting the word out here, is that we can correct these problems so that we can strengthen our position in the war on terror.
Vernon in Zephyr Hills, go ahead, sir.
Yes.
Go ahead. You've got your TV
Kathy,
on. Turn it down. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to ask the good sergeant a question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Speak. Your TV's turned up, but go ahead, sir. Say your question, then we're going to have to let you go.
Yes, Sergeant.
Yes.
I would like to ask the good sergeant, I see that you back in one good piece. So what's your beef? You'd rather those people come over here and kill us, or we kill them over there? What's the difference?
Okay, turn your TV down. We're going to let him answer.
Sure. My goal is for nobody to have to kill anybody. And by like I said, I supported the policy that led us to Iraq. I believe we have an obligation to the Iraqi people to ensure that we create now an environment for stability. My issue is some of the things we've been doing, such as torture, has undermined our position in the war on terror. It's made us weaker. It's bolstered the ranks of our enemies. And so my motivation is to try to get us to drop these tactics, or at least recognize that we are committing them so we can evaluate and hopefully strengthen our position in the war on terror so we can eventually leave Iraq a peaceful place.
Do you think when soldiers get over to Iraq, they do things they wouldn't ordinarily do under different circumstances because they become part of a group mentality of they have to go over there with the idea of protecting themselves against the other people and demonize them? I mean, what happens in that thinking process once they get to be part of that group?
Well, I think that plays a part, but larger than that, in the situation that I came into in 2005, 2006, this wasn't a problem of enlisted soldiers somehow doing the wrong thing. This was a case of soldiers who were largely young, a few years out of high school, hadn't been trained by the military. They arrived at Abu Ghraib, and all of a sudden now there's an officer, a person of authority, telling them this is how you treat a detainee. And of course they're going to defer to that person's authority and their judgment. So I think that's the problem.
Do you still support the war?
I do, yes. Like I said earlier, I'm a supporter of John McCain. I believe that America was in a large part responsible for the problems in Iraq, for the oppression of the Iraqi people by Saddam. We had supplied Saddam with some of the weapons that he used to suppress his people, and we gave him billions of dollars through our oil use, which he then used to prop himself up. Now, of course, military force is rarely the appropriate solution, but in the case of Iraq, we had tried over a decade of UN resolutions and sanctions and humanitarian aid and no-fly zones, and none of that was working. Now, of course, during the course of the war, we've done things such as torture, which I think has made it more difficult for us to achieve our objectives there. But I don't think that makes the cause in Iraq any less worthy. It just means we need to do a better job of living up to the ideals that we espouse.
Mm-hmm. And what about your opinion of torture? And I know there's a big publicity thing now about waterboarding and other things like that, to obtain intelligence information, which is not what you saw. Right. But in order to obtain intelligence information, do you support that?
Well, I've personally never seen a waterboarding. I know that Senator McCain, who has been waterboarded, opposes it. I know there are CIA officers who have used waterboarding in the past who have come out publicly and said they don't think we should be using it. I know there are Colin Powell has come out pretty strongly against it. Mm-hmm. These are all people who have more experience with that technique than I do, and they tend to believe that whatever benefits are derived from torturing people aren't worth the cost and what it does to weaken our position and bolster the ranks of our enemy. I tend to agree with that.
30 seconds left, Michael. Just interested in what other members of your unit or other military have said in response to your
I've received a very, very broad range of responses, as you can probably tell from a few of the calls here. I've been called a hero. I've been called a traitor. I've been called a patriot and an America hater. I try to focus my attentions on coming out and telling the truth, telling what I saw. And, people will react however they're going to react to hearing the truth. I can't control it. I try to focus on...
I will tell you, it's a fascinating read and very illuminating. We'll be right back with Michael Keller. For information about Michael and his book, log on to torturecentral.com. You can order the book, read a sample chapter, and chat with him and blog and get his comments, and he'll be glad to answer you back if you didn't get through today, because I know a lot of people have called in. Michael, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. Appreciate your service to our country, and we hope you have a great afternoon, everybody.